Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. My name is Josita. It is your first time here. Thank you for stopping by. In this video, I'm going to be sharing with you guys how to cut and sew this black side gathered dress with collar. If it's what you love to learn, kindly watch to the end. And if you're yet to subscribe, please hit on the subscribe button below and also turn on the notification bell to get notified whenever I upload a new video. So without wasting much time, let's just right into the tutorial. This is the fabric I'm using for this tutorial. It's a crepe fabric and I have 3 yards here. Starting off with the pattern drafting, from the tip of my pattern paper, I will mark 1 inch downwards, square across and label that shoulder. Placing my tip on the shoulder, I'm going to mark my bust at 10 inches and half length at 16 inches. I'll square across and label the lines. On the shoulder line, I will mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches. On that 8 inches point, I'm going to come downwards by 1.5 for my shoulder slope. Still on the shoulder line, I'm going to come inwards by 3 inches for the neck width and 3 inches downwards for the neck depth. And I'm going to connect with a curve. I'm going to connect the shoulder slant from the neck width to the 1.5 inches I came down by. Placing my tape on the shoulder slope, I will mark 7.5 inches downwards, which is my armhole level. And on that point where it ended, I'm going to extend the line and label that chest line. Then I'm going to connect with a straight line. On the midpoint of that straight line, I'm going to come in by ½ inch. And I'm going to mark part of my bust circumference on my chest line. Then use my curved ruler to connect from the shoulder slope to the ½ inch I came in by, to the quarter of my bust circumference that I marked on the chest line to form my armhole curve. Next, I'm going to place my tape on the half length and mark my hip at 9 inches. I'll square across and label the line. I'll also mark the full length I'm working with, so go ahead and input your own gown length. At this point, I'm going to mark the darts. Placing my tape on the bust line, I'll come inwards by 4 inches, which is half of my bust span or my nipple to nipple measurement. I'm also going to mark ½ inch on the waistline, which is also the half length, and on the hip line as well. And I'm going to connect with a straight line. This straight line is the dart line. Placing my tape on the half length, I'm going to mark 6 inches downwards on the dart line, and on the half length, I'm going to come in by ½ inch on both sides of the dart line. Then I'm going to connect it upwards to the dart line on the bust line and downwards to the 6 inches I marked. Next, I'm going to tighten the under bust, though this step is optional, but it helps to lift and shape the bust. To tighten the under bust, I'll place my tape on my shoulder line and I'm going to measure my under bust. I'm making use of 13 inches. On that 13 inches mark, I'll come outwards by ½ inch on both sides of the dart leg and connect it to the bust point and downwards to the half length, just like the way you see me doing. Afterwards, I'm going to connect from the midpoint of my armhole curve to the bust point with a slight curve. This is called an ordinary princess dart. Now I'm going to start marking quarter of my round body measurement. On the bust line, I'm going to mark quarter of my bust circumference, which I've already marked on the chest line, and I'm going to add 1.5 inch sewing allowance. On the half length, I will mark quarter of my waist circumference and add 1.5 inch sewing allowance, and I'm also going to add 1 inch for the dart we took on the waistline. On the hip line, I'm going to divide my hip circumference by 4, mark whatever I gave me there, and I'm going to add 1.5 inch sewing allowance. Then on the full length, whatever measurement I got on the hip line, I'm going to minus 1 inch from it and mark it on the full length. Afterwards, I'm going to connect with my ruler and cut it out. After cutting, I decided to take the side bust dart. This is optional too. All this dart helps the outfit to sit properly on the body. On the bust line, I came downwards by 2 inches and connected it to the bust point, then slashed it open. Then I'm going to cut the princess dart open as well, then close the side bust dart. Following that, I'm going to mark and cut out where the side gathers will be. Placing my tape on the half length, I'll mark 2 inches downwards. I will also mark 3.5 inches inwards on the hip line from the center front. I'll mark the same 3.5 inches on the full length and connect it to the 3.5 inches I marked on the hip line with a straight line. Then I'll use my curved ruler to connect from the 2 inches I marked by the side to the 3.5 inches I marked on the hip line with a curve. This is where the side gathers will be. So go ahead and do yours just like the way I did mine. If you don't understand it, you can play the video backwards. Afterwards, I'll cut it out. After cutting, ensure you label each of your pattern pieces. You can use any number or letter to the one you can remember. Now for the back pattern, I've gone ahead to rule my shoulder line. Placing my tape on the shoulder line, I will mark my bust line and half length. I'll swear across and label the lines. At the center back, I'm going to mark 1 inch for zip allowance from the shoulder line down to the full length and connect with a straight line. On the shoulder line, I'm going to mark half of my shoulder measurement, which is 8 inches. Do not include your zip allowance while taking this measurement. On that 8 inches mark, I'm going to come downwards by 1.5 inches for my shoulder slope. And I'm also going to mark 3 inches inwards for the neck width and 1 inch downwards for the neck depth. I will connect with my curved ruler and also connect the shoulder slope. Placing my tape on the shoulder slope, I'm going to mark 7.5 inches downwards for my armhole level and connect with a straight line. Then on the point where the armhole level ended, I'm going to extend the line outwards and label that my chest line. I'll find the midpoint of the straight line that I've drawn. On that midpoint, I'm going to come in by ½ inch. I'll mark part of my bust circumference on the chest line. They use my curved ruler to connect from the shoulder slope to the ½ inch I came in by to quarter of my bust circumference that I marked on the chest line. And this forms my back armhole curve. Placing my tape on the half length, I will mark my hip line of 9 inches and I'll also mark the full length I'm working with. I'll swear across and label the lines. Now for the dart, I'm going to mark half of my nipple to nipple measurement, which is 4 inches on my bust line, half length, and on my hip line, and I'll connect with a straight line. I'll mark the dart same way we did for the front. Now I'm going to impute quarter of my round body measurement. On the bust line, I'm going to mark quarter of my bust circumference, which I've already marked on the chest line. So I'm going to add 1.5 inch. On the half length, I will mark quarter of my waist circumference and I'll add 1.5 inch sewing allowance, and I will also add 1 inch for the dart. On the hip line, I'll mark quarter of my hip circumference plus 1.5 inch sewing allowance. On the full length, I'll minus 1 inch from the measurement I marked on the hip line. Then go ahead and connect these marks with a slight curve. I will connect from the dart line to the midpoint of my armhole curve. Now for the part where we are going to cut out for the side gathers, on the hip line I'm going to come in by 3.5 inches, and on the full length I'm also going to mark 3.5 inches inwards and connect with a straight line. I'll come downwards by 2 inches from the half length and connect it to the 3.5 inches I came inwards by on the hip line with a curved line. At the zip side, I'll come in by ½ inch on the waistline and connect it upwards to the shoulder and downwards to the full length. Go ahead and cut it out. So I was done cutting, and this is the part we are going to be using for the side gathers. This is the back and the front. I labeled it. So what I'm going to do now is to hold them together with my masking tape. Now I'm going to do slash and spread. I'm marking 1 inch interval. This totally depends on what you want. If you want yours to be fuller, you can do 1 inch. If you want it to be lesser, you can do 2 inch. It depends on what you want, and it also depends on the amount of fabric you have. So just go ahead and do what you want. I was not ruling the lines. What I'm going to do now is to number it. Please ensure you number yours. It's very important. This numbering helps to arrange it after slashing. After slashing, when you are spreading, it helps to arrange it correctly. I was done numbering. Now I'm slashing each of the lines. I was on slashing. Now I'm marking the upper part of each of them so that when I'm placing it on my fabric, I will not turn it upside down. So it's important to indicate the upper part of yours as well. At this point, I'm going to fold my fabric into two. I'm cutting the two sides at the same time. So after folding the fabric into two, I'm going to place each of these pattern pieces on my fabric, and just like the way we did when we are marking the lines, we did I did 1 inch interval. You're also going to choose the amount of space you're going to leave in between each of these pattern pieces. I made mine 1.5 because I didn't have so much fabric. You can make yours 2 inches or 2.5. It just depends on the amount of fabric and how full you want it to be, how full you want your gathers to be. Go ahead and do yours the way you want. So my table was not big enough to contain all my pieces, so I have to do this on the floor. I'll quickly arrange it behind the camera and show you guys. So guys, I was done arranging and this is it. The spaces in between is 1.5 inch, and I pinned each of these pattern pieces to my fabric to avoid shifting. Make sure the pattern pieces are equal and straight at the down part. While cutting, I'm going to add 1/2 inch on the upper part, and I'm also going to add 1/2 inch by the two sides where I'll be joining to the dress. I'm not adding anything to the down part because I've already added folding allowance to the pattern while I was drafting. So I'll just go ahead and cut this. If you have any question regarding this, please drop it at the comment section. I'll be willing to answer all your questions and reply to your comments. What I'm going to do now is to cut the sleeve. So the sleeve is a 3/4 sleeve that stops at the elbow. So I'm gonna head to fold my fabric into two. Placing my tape on the tip of my fabric, I'm going to mark 4 inches downwards. This 4 inches is the biceps line. I'll also mark 15 inches. 15 inches is the full length plus 2 inches. The elbow length I'm working with is 13 inches. Plus 2 inches for folding is 15 inches. So I'll mark 15 inches, and I'll also mark 9 inches, which is the short sleeve length, and square across this line. On the biceps line, I'll mark 10 inches. 10 inches is half of my armhole circumference. Then from that 10 inches, I'm going to connect it to the tip of my fabric like this to a slanted line. I'm going to find the midpoint of the slanted line. I'll use my curved ruler to connect from the beginning of my fabric to the half of the slanted line, and I'll also connect from the slanted line to my biceps line, just like the way you see me doing. On my short sleeve length, I will mark my round arm circumference divided by 2, and I'm going to add extra 1.5 inch sewing allowance. On the full length, I'll mark half of my elbow circumference and add 1.5 inch sewing allowance. I'm going to connect the measurement and cut it out. After cutting it, I will use it to cut the second sleeve. Next, I'm going to cut the collar. To do this, I'll place the front and back shoulder together like this, pin it together and trace the neckline. I'm going to mark where the front and back neckline stops. I'm not going to include the 1 inch zip allowance because my collar will not get to the 1 inch zip allowance. After tracing the neckline, I'm going to cut it out. After cutting, I'm going to remove my fabric. Placing my tape on that point where I indicated as the front, I'm going to mark the width of this collar, which is 3 inches. So I'm going to mark 3 inches from that place I indicated as the front to the place I indicated as the back. So just like the way you see me doing, I'm going to mark the 3 inches round like that. After doing that, I'm going to cut it out. After cutting it out, at the down part of this collar, at the center front, you know where we indicated as the front. Now on the down part of that front, I'm going to mark 1.5 inches inwards. This 1.5 inch that I'm marking is the space in between the collar at the front. You can see this collar up here. You can see the space in between the collar at the down part in form of V shape. That is why I marked these 2 inches. So from the upper part, I'm going to connect to that 1.5 inches. Then I added 1/2 inch for turning with lining both on the front and on the back, because I'm going to be turning this collar with the lining. Please, if you don't understand, you can play the video backwards. So I'm going to cut this out, and that is it for the collar pattern. What I will do next is to cut this collar pattern on my fabric. To cut the collar, I'm going to fold my fabric into two, place the collar pattern on it, pin it down, and go ahead and cut it out. I'm going to add half-inch allowance to the upper part. That is where I'm going to be joining to the neck of my dress. That is the only allowance I'm going to add, which is half-inch. Every other allowance has been added on the pattern. So I'll go ahead now and cut it out, and I'm going to cut two of these, so the two sides of the neck. I was done cutting the collar. What I'm going to do now is to cut the facing for the center front and the center back. This facing is what I'm going to use to turn the front and back neckline. So go ahead and cut your facing, whatever shape, whatever size you want. For me, I made a short round facing. So this is the center front. I'm going to do the same for the center back. I was done with all the cuttings. What I'm going to do now is to join all my pieces together. So this is the center front and the side front. I'm going to remove the pattern papers, open up the center front and join the two side fronts to the center front using half-inch. I'm going to do exactly the same for the back pieces. So these are the back pieces. I'm going to join the side backs to the center backs using half-inch. So I'll quickly go back to my machine and do that and come and show you guys. So guys, I was done joining the sides of the back and front to their center. So what I'm going to do now is to join the shoulders of the front and back. Placing it front facing front, I'm going to join the shoulder of the front and the back using half-inch. I'm also going to join the shoulders of my front and back facing together. Now for the collar, I have 4 pieces of the fabric here. 2 is going to serve as a lining and the other 2 is going to be the main fabric. So I'm going to separate it 2 each, and also I'm indicating where the center front is and where the center back is. Indicate yours so that you will not be confused, please. So you see the effect of the 1.5 inch that we removed from the down part of the center front. So you see the effect, it has space in between. So this side is going to be after sewing it. So I'm going to use half-inch to sew it round. The 2 sides I'm going to sew it. The only place that is going to be open is the upper part, because I'm going to be attaching it to the neckline of our dress. I was done sewing the collars. I'm trimming the half-inch so that when I turn it and iron it is going to relax. So trimming it helps to reduce the bulkiness of the fabric. I'm working with a thick crepe fabric, so make sure you trim yours. After trimming, I'll turn it to the right side and give it a good ironing. And the main dress, I was done joining the front and back shoulders. What I'm going to do now is to attach the sleeve. I'll first notch the center of the sleeve. I'm going to place the center on the shoulder of my dress and sew it on both sides of the arm using half-inch. I'll also fold the down part of the sleeve using the 2-inch allowance we added. After attaching the sleeve, I'm going to place the 2 sides of the front and back, front facing front, use my pin to hold it down and mark 1.5 inch. 1.5 inch is the allowance we added, the sewing allowance we added for the dress. So I'm going to mark 1.5 inch for the 2 sides of the dress. I'll go over to my machine and join it, then come back and show you guys. This is the part we are going to be using for the side gathers. I'm going to gather the upper part. I was done with that, and I've also joined the 2 sides of my dress. What I'm going to do now is to join these gathers to the sides. Placing it front facing front, I'm going to start from the hem, then place the sides of the gathers to the sides of the dress and join using half-inch. To join the collar, I'm going to notch the center front of my neckline. Place the center front of the collar to the center front of the dress, pin it down and sew using half-inch. You're going to do this for the 2 collars. Make sure that the collar aligns with the neckline of your dress before joining. And remember that the collar will not get to your zip allowance. That is why it is very important to pin it first before sewing. I was done joining the collar to the neckline of my dress, and this is what it looks like. What I'm going to do now is to turn the neckline with my facing. To do this, I'll place my facing and the dress front facing front. Make sure that the center and every other side align. Pin it down and join using half-inch. I was done joining the facing. I'm going to trim this 1/2 inch to reduce the bulkiness, and so that when I iron it, it's going to relax. I was done trimming. As you can see, I can now easily turn the facing to the back. I'll go over to my ironing board now and use my hemming gun to iron and hold the facing down to give it a clean and flat finishing. The last thing I'm going to attach to this dress is my zip. I'm going to measure 18 inches downwards from my neckline. The zip should not be too long because this is not an entirely fitted dress. So that will be all for the cutting and sewing of this dress. If you find this video helpful and you've learned something, please give me a thumbs up. Hit on that subscribe button, guys. It goes a long way to encourage me. Thanks for watching, and see you guys in my next tutorial.